Welcome to the On the Blue Line podcast. I'm your host, Wayne Mulder, and it's exciting to be back with you again this week. Here we are. It's already September. The weather's starting to change. It's it's Florida, so it hasn't changed that much. Fair. But welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. This week, it's all about a guest who created an application that deals with officer-involved shootings, use of force incidents, and it's really about giving officers peace of mind. Let's get to it. The On the Blue Line podcast starts now. If you break the law, if you decide to do this, we're going to hold you responsible.
You are the only good thing in someone's worst day. That is a privilege for a police officer.
At the very least, you could honor the sacrifices of police officers and their families.
We have the ability to save the Republic. So welcome back. This is our second to last of the evergreen episodes of just a quick version for those of you who are just finding us, just finding the podcast. Essentially, the podcast started in 2019. However, in 2023, I found out I was going to have open heart surgery early in the year, and that came to fruition, unfortunately, and it put me out of commission for a while. So there was about an 11-month period where I was out of pocket due to just recovering from that heart surgery and getting back to my normal job, which is law enforcement, and then coming back to this podcast. So there was a series of episodes that had already been recorded that I wanted to make sure went out. I think it's imperative that anytime a guest is willing to give us a little bit of their time, that their story gets put out to the masses and that you get to enjoy it. And then also I want to be straight with you guys. So that's why honestly, these are mostly evergreen episodes. If I didn't tell you that they were recorded a very long time ago, you probably would have no idea. However, I think it's important that you also know. So this is second to last of those episodes. And once this week, and then in 2 weeks when that one comes out, then we will be up to date, and the ones that are being recorded now will be the ones that are coming out on a weekly basis. That being said, two things I want to draw your attention to. If you haven't considered our Patreon page, I encourage you to go to ontheblueline.com, scroll down to the third section, and that will take the link that will take you over to the Patreon page. Why join? Well, that's a fair question. And the why is, so there's new content that I'm putting in there every week. I go a little bit deeper. This week, I did a whole, about a 10-minute thing on what really changed my life as far as from a standpoint of vision, goal setting, and mindset. So just different topics are in there. And then there's also some behind the scenes stuff as well. So if you want to go deeper, if you're enjoying the content, then please check that out. There's a couple options. And the third option actually includes a monthly meeting that you and I will be in every month. So I hope you'll check it out. I hope that's something you enjoy. The other thing is, if you're enjoying this content, if this is, if you have any feedback, anything you want to do, just please go to our Instagram page at On the Blue Line Podcast, at On the Blue Line Podcast, and be sure to like the page and then send me a DM. And I would love to get your feedback. I will definitely interact with you there, and I would love to get to know you as well. So, and then as always, anything else you want to know about, ontheblueline.com. So this week's guest is Douglas Parker. Doug has extensive history, like over 40 years of law enforcement experience, easy for me to say, about 40 years of law enforcement experience, and primarily at the Georgia Bureau of Investigations. We go through all that. This podcast is a little bit slower paced, so I encourage you to just kind of hang in there, because we're going to get into the meat of why proper documentation during use of force incidents and officer-involved shootings is so important, and some of the things that can go horribly wrong, and the impact that it has on law enforcement officers really for their entire life. So if you're new to the career, if you've been in the career a long time, but you're just not really up to speed on what's out there and some of these new applications that are coming on the market, please check this out. You can still go to the Thin Blue Defend, which is what we are talking about in here. It's thinbluedefend.com. However, if you scroll down to the show notes. There's actually another website as well that takes you to what is a newer iteration of the app called Second Defense. So be sure to check all that out. Doug and his team have been great. They're really great people. I feel horrible it's taken so long to get this out to you. But if you would do me a favor and just at some point during this episode or at the end of the episode, just scroll down into the show notes and check out what he's doing over there. I think it may very much benefit your agency or benefit you personally. So without taking any more time, here's this week's guest, Doug Parker. Well, Doug, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on, Wayne. I really appreciate this.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. I'm so glad you guys reached out to me and that I've gotten to get to know you a little bit and hear your story and what you're doing for law enforcement. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Same here. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you. Well, let's begin. As I always do, I like to start with some get to know you questions. And I start with the easy softball question right up front. Is it coffee or tea?
Cuban coffee in the morning and definitely tea.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, being from Georgia, I was wondering where the answer is going to be.
Right.
Well, very good. Cuban coffee, you say? Any particular, like what got you into specifically Cuban coffee, especially Georgia? Because I'm being from Florida, of course, I'm thinking Tampa, I'm thinking Ybor City.
I have a friend in Miami, spend some time down there, and great little gas station that has the great pastries and the coffee in there. So visit that every morning when I'm down there.
It's good stuff.
It is.
So, do you have a best or worst travel story?
Ooh, no, sir, I don't believe so. It's traveling all the time, of course. And of course, with the Bureau, it seems like you're on the road all the time, driving, 100 miles an hour with my left knee, burger in the left hand and the police radio in the right hand. So,
yes, I think we all can relate to that story for sure.
Yes, sir.
Do you have a favorite or most meaningful modern nonfiction book? And I know I put a lot of qualifiers on there, but essentially a lot of people say like the Bible and so forth. So that's why I said modern. Is there a book that is really meaningful to you and has meant a lot to you?
Well, it always changes. Ever since retiring and getting into the consultant work with use of force, several books by different experts in the field. Alexis Hartwell, I believe she's Deadly Force Encounters, and then Lance LaRusso has written a book on use of force. So been more into those kind of books lately.
Okay. Well, which makes perfect sense with what we're going to talk about today. So we will segue into that here shortly. What is that place that brings you the most peace? You like your favorite spot, maybe a vacation spot or whatever, where you can just stop, breathe, and enjoy life?
I have a captain's license, so I love the intercoastal waterways and been to the BVIs. So anything around water and have a place on the lake. So anything around water is really just a great place to be.
It's awesome. It always seems like it's either going to be water or mountains with that question, one or the two for most people.
Right.
So let's go ahead from there. I've already prefaced a little bit that you're from the Georgia area, but could you tell us a little bit about your origin story and maybe going into law enforcement and a little bit about who is Doug?
Sure. Grew up in a law enforcement family. Father ended up being chief of police with Clayton County Police Department below Atlanta. And we lived in a rural area. Well, had a farm because most police don't make enough money. So that was his side job. We worked cattle during the evenings and weekends. But he took me on a liquor still raid when I was 14 years old. And we were shot at. And so it's in your blood at that point, so exciting. Mom was pretty upset. Of course, husband taking, your son out and getting shot at. But
I can see mom being a little upset.
Yeah, but what a story, Monday, the next day at school.
Yes.
To tell everybody.
That is wonderful. So from there, were you always with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, or did you kind of go through the typical working?
No, and that's why I was a little bit different. I went to graduate from Georgia Southern University in Statesboro, and after that, I knew I wanted to get on with the Bureau, but they had a freeze on hiring. So one of the guys that worked for my dad got the head security job at Georgia Pacific when they moved their headquarters from Portland, Oregon to Atlanta. And so I started with him even before the building was completely built. We were working on policies and procedures and, how the building was going to be managed in the security field. So did that for right about a year until finally the freeze was lifted, and then I got on with the Bureau.
Okay. Very good. I think it's interesting. You mentioned there growing up and your dad working cattle and so forth on the side and your parents in farming. I had some other guests on recently and they were from farms in the Midwest. And I really do think, speaking to a lot of retired law enforcement officers and people who are still in the business but have been in it for enough time that they could retire, that really does establish a work ethic that I think has kind of changed as society has changed. But it is interesting, what that, growing up around a farm and the work ethic that really instills in people.
Yeah, no, we worked up until midnight on Saturday night and we'd stop because that was Sunday. And we didn't work on Sunday unless the cows got out or had to feed them. But early on, I thought, man, this is pretty good. Finally get a day of rest.
Yes. Well, and that's as it should be. So that's awesome. At your time at Georgia Bureau of Investigation, it looks like you've done a lot of very interesting things. I'm sure a lot of probably some major investigations, if you want to tell us a little bit about those, but also you did some work with like the threat assessment at the 96 Olympics when they were held in Atlanta. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Of course, the Bureau, the GBI, we were a requested agency. So, you as a private citizen couldn't call us to come out to, investigate anything. We had to be requested by a chief, sheriff, district attorney, or work at the discretion of the governor. A lot of different jobs, and they were mainly major cases. I mean, it was we were in, I would say, a rural area, but again, the Augusta, Georgia area, and so had some pretty rural counties. And so when there were murders or child molestations or bank robberies, whatever, they would normally call us. Then when the Olympics came along, got heavily involved in that because some of the property, some of the venues for the Olympics were on state property. So that's how GBI became involved. And then I was at the World Congress Center. We had several different venues within the World Congress Center. And I had to go up there about a year and a half, even before everything, as they were building out, to work on, how are we going to manage the security, because we were having officers come in from federal, state, local agencies, and we had to come as one and have training for everybody in how we're going to utilize the resources to protect, not only the patrons coming in, but also the athletes and dignitaries that would often come.
Yeah. So we're talking 96. I actually was through, I won't mention that I was in high school, but I was through Atlanta in like the 94, 95 time period. And this is just more of a curiosity question, and you can kind of take it for, what's your thoughts on this? But I'd be curious, how have things like that changed? Because obviously since then, we've had 9/11, we've had, the world's changed, the security state's changed, the Homeland Security now exists. There's a lot of things that didn't exist in those days. So what would you say if you were just looking back at kind of a synopsis of what was good, what was bad, and what's different? What would be your thoughts on that?
Well, it changed immediately the night of the bombing.
Right.
I was on a day shift and got the phone call, and it was right back at work. And in fact, they brought in everybody that was in training down in Brunswick at the Federal Training Center, immediately bust them all up to Atlanta. I mean, we not closed down, but security was definitely strengthened, tenfold because of what happened at the Olympics. And it continued from there. I mean, you've seen everything from airports to any type of building, security guy down at a courthouse this past week, new courthouse that was built. It's completely, enclosed with, fencing and gate access, controlled access. So, either whether you're as a vehicle coming in, workers there. So, the mindset totally changed, especially after 9/11. But again, that night it happened with us at the Olympics.
Wow. Yeah, and you're definitely seeing it move towards more soft targets now, with even like what they're wanting to see with schools, and even like this outcry of the tragedy that happened in Virginia last week. And you're just really starting to see kind of a move towards, in good and bad when it comes to a security state, which we won't get into. But,
Right.
There's definitely, you're seeing it now move into other things as society changes, sadly.
Yes, definitely changing, and it'll continue to change.
Yes. You had written a book called A Kill Her Plan Behind the Crime Scene Tape. Was that a specific investigation, or can you tell us a little bit about this book? And it is available on Amazon, by the way.
Sure. It was a murder case that I worked a couple of hundred, been involved at either the case agent or assisting other agents in the office. So been in many homicide or death investigations. This one was a homicide. And I realized that, not every case is book worthy. And out of all the ones I worked, this one kind of rose to the top as far as, intrigue, what happened and how it happened. The lady that was killed, Christy Anderson, and having to deal with her family. And that was, I guess, the turning point, me as far as being a hardened, been to many, many death scenes and seen all kind of bodies and different types of, either decay or, freshly death that just had happened. So, this was the first time that I guess I kind of let my guard down a little bit. And, with Christy as mother, it really affected me as far as getting to know her and what she was going through. Usually I didn't let it affect me at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, interesting case. Actually had one of the guys that would arrest even tried to hire somebody to kill me and the sheriff down there in the county. So yeah, pretty interesting case. The way it came about and how long it took to recover certain items and make the arrest.
Okay. And does the book go all the way through a resolution? Like, is there an outcome in the end so you kind of know what happened with the case and so forth?
Yes, sir. And what I did also is, as I would talk about certain things in this case, I'd bring in other cases to prove a point of an investigative technique or why we do certain things. And that's what it was with Christia's mother, was she didn't understand, why can't you tell me this? What do you mean a search warrant? You're waiting on what? The judge, or why don't you just go in the house, and why can't you do this and that? So it was a lot of explaining. A lot of folks don't understand, how we operate. What we have to go through, the legal web that we have to go through to do the things in the proper way.
Right. No, I that intrigues me. I will certainly check it out. And then for the listeners, it's available on Amazon as well. And there'll be a link in the show notes for them. But
thank you, sir.
I want to bring up, we talked a little bit offline, and I've heard you talk before about passing up a Chick-fil-A franchise. And I only bring that up because actually the part that caught my interest was you mentioned knowing Truett Cathy. And when I was young, before he passed, that was one of my goals of mentors who I wanted to someday meet, because I was, when I grew up, I thought I was going to be a business guy. That's what I thought at 18, 19 years old. Instead, I put plants in the ground, green side up, and later became a cop, neither of which I think qualify. But that was my dream. And there were guys like pre-President Trump, but guys like, Art of the Deal. I loved his book. And then, of course, Truett Cathy and his story and his amazing faith. So I just thought I'd bring it up because I'd be curious to hear a little bit about Truett, and maybe you can even tell the listeners your passing up a franchise story.
Sure. He had 200 acres right around on another road right around from us. And so my dad always helped him out with managing the cows also, and especially his son, Dan Cathy. And so we were always over there. And so after I got out of college and married my wife, who is still with me, thank the Lord, after 40 years, he said, "Hey, I have a barn out there. You can live in the barn as long as you want to while you're at Georgia Pacific." And the barn was a little nicer than even a lot of people's houses, had nice living quarters in it. So yeah, we moved in over there. And so he came out one morning, and I think I was off that day. He said, "Let's go ride motorcycles." And I said, "Well, Mr. Cathy, don't you have to go to work?" He said, "Well, I am the boss. I own the company. I do what I want to, and let's go ride motorcycles." I said, "Yes, sir, I will." So we rode around for an hour or so and came back, and he said, "I'll give you a Chick-fil-A unit anywhere you'd like if you want to work, in the Chick-fil-A business." And I said, "Well, Mr. Cathy, wow, what an honor, first of all, just to be offered, because I know you don't offer it to just anybody." And I said, let me think about it and talk to my wife and pray about it. I came back 2 or 3 days later. I said, "Mr. Cathy, just as, your son's following your footsteps, so must I." I said, and I told him the story of being shot at, when I was 14. I said, that's in your blood. And that's the career path that I've wanted to pursue. Again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So I knew how much operators made of those stores even back then, and I knew what the police made. Again, like I said, not a very good financial decision, but it's what's in your heart.
Absolutely. And it's great to hear that story, and because it isn't about the money. It really isn't. We say that, and I get, like Zig Ziglar used to say, it's not about the money, but when you really need it, you need it, kind of thing. And that's true as well, but there's a lot of truth to this career being a calling. And I think sometimes so many people step away from the why of what brought them in here in the first place. And that's where we see a lot of the despondency and other issues over time.
Yeah, me, it wasn't, oh, I'm going to help people. That was exciting. I got shot at. I want some more of that.
Drive fast, flashy lights.
Oh, yeah.
Good stuff. Now, motorcycles, off-road bikes or road bikes, or do you still ride?
He had both.
Okay.
But these were Harleys even back then, and had a bunch of dirt bikes having 200 acres. So
nice. You still ride?
A lot of fun. Nah, getting too old.
Yeah. Well, I still have an endorsement, but I don't remember the last time I touched one. So that's why I was curious. So let's segue from here. We're going to get to what you've created, which is amazing. But before we get to what you created, let's kind of talk a little bit about the problem that you saw. So let's go into a little bit of your experience with maybe looking at and investigating use of force issues. One thing you mentioned that I found very interesting, we all know Graham v. Connor, and that's something we have drilled into us. And yet you were working before that case was steering things. So definitely kind of take us into there and what you saw.
Yeah, even before Graham Connor and Illinois versus Gates, which gave us totality of the circumstances.
Right.
Because when I first started writing a search warrant, there were only 3 categories you could write a search warrant. And it wasn't the totality of the circumstances. We didn't understand that at the time. You had to make it fit the box, whether it was a concerned citizen, informant, or from law enforcement. And so you had to get your probable cause to fit one of those 3 categories. And the same way with working use of force cases. I'd be called out and I'd go to the scene. And at that time, we processed our own scenes at the time also. So didn't have a crime scene tech. So I'd process the scene and then go interview the officer. And the standard back then was just, if I could just get the officer to say, I was in fear for my life, that was it. I mean, that was the standard.
Wow.
And so I'd take my report, give it to the district attorney, and district attorney would look at it. We had district attorneys back then that would make decisions. Hey, it's a justified shooting. I'm not doing anything with it. I don't think even before all that, I don't had any case that went to any kind of grand jury or anything. So then when Graham Connor came along, of course, that was still back before the technology age. So even the decision was whatever year it was made in, 86, I believe. We probably didn't get the notice for 2 or 3 years later as to how we're supposed to do things. And it changed, and it became that objective reasonableness. What would a reasonable officer do under the same facts and circumstances in the case? Law enforcement is given that. I mean, that's a pretty special gift to law enforcement that we are judged in a different light. Yeah. Private citizen, it'll probably come down to, an affirmative defense. I've got to get on the stand and tell this jury why I shot or killed somebody. But we're given that, and especially here in Georgia, officers can testify before a grand jury in their defense. Now they're subject to cross-examination, but so the mindset changed a little bit, but not until I really started when I retired 10 years ago, started working with, these private legal services that officers, in which I paid into for 30 years, started working with them. They'd call me in to do the investigation, and which led to a case down in Kingsley, Georgia, where a young officer, only been on 2 years, late at night, saw someone that got in a car they knew did not have a driver's license, had a suspended license. So there's our first clue that we need to be cognizant of as to that should go in a report.
Right.
What's your prior knowledge even before the use of force incident? Had a chase, the car crashed. passenger runs in the woods, driver runs out, and we saw this on vehicle cam, dash cam, runs out 4 or 5 steps, runs back in the car, grabs something, and then runs. And of course, we documented, certain street lights were out. It's very dark. The body cam that this officer started chasing the driver, it's very dark. All you have is sound, basically. Right. And ended up having to shoot the guy because they fought. The suspect got up on top, and it's not a person of interest. It's a suspect. I hate that word, person of interest. Yeah. But they fought. Suspect grabbed at the officer's gun. The officer had to shoot the suspect. So I'm doing the forensic walkthrough with the officer because I got involved about a week later. And I knew what he had already told his attorney. So I'm walking through, and we go there at 12 minutes or 12:30 at night, whenever it was. And we're walking through, and I'm asking, and he's telling me what he saw. And when we were at the point of where the suspect got out and ran in the woods, I said, well, and this is Zach Presley. He's a good friend of mine now. I said, Zach, what were you thinking when the suspect got out and ran in the woods? He said, well, I didn't know if the guy was going to double back and help his friend out, run down in the wood line, come behind us. I said, well, Zach, why didn't you put that in your report? Right. He said, well, I didn't think it was that important. And when the driver gets out and runs back into the car, I said, Zach, what were you thinking there? He said, well, I thought he was going to get a gun. I said, well, why didn't you put that in your report? He said, well, I didn't think it was that important. So after the second or third, I don't think it was that important. And that's when the light bulb went off in my head. Said, we've got to have some way for these officers to explain in the cognitive process their perceptions, what they knew prior, what was going through their mind as they, now it's not a big thought process. I mean, it's just real quick. Hey, thought he was going to get a gun.
Right.
And, thought the guy was going to double back, but all that needs to be in a report. I mean, not only for the agency to get a better report, but now we're talking about litigation because this officer was terminated and was facing grand jury. And in fact, did get indicted by a grand jury.
Really?
And we had to go to trial on it. Now, luckily, he was found not guilty, and that's a great thing. But it was a justified shooting. But the problem was this officer didn't make a statement to the agency. He was immediately terminated and again fired, for what they thought he had done, because the problem with that case was on the body cam, on his own body cam, he said certain things. And then when another deputy drove up and said, Zach, what happened? He said, well, God, I don't know. We were fighting and he ran and I shot. Well, we had a bullet hole in the back, sort of the lower back. And that's all the investigating agency had to go on. And that's why the department said, well, hey, shot him in the back. And that's not what happened. And when he's telling me, he said, well, yeah, he ran, but he turned around on me and raised up his arm, right? Stuck his hand out at me. I said, again, what were you thinking? He said, well, I thought he had a gun at that point. That's why I shot. And it was 8 rounds in 2.5 seconds. And if you've been to force science training, you understand how that's important for one thing, because 2.5 seconds, 8 shots, and he hit him 8 times. They were in a line. First shot was 90 degrees lateral into the chest. Second shot, third, fourth, and on the round. So yeah, there was a shot, but it was after he had turned. So, they didn't have the autopsy results immediately. So that's why he was terminated. And then later, because he didn't make a statement to his agency, he was indicted for. DA wanted to go for murder, ended up being voluntary and involuntary manslaughter, and got not guilty on those charges after going through the trial and being able to explain it. Because how it works on these cases, you hire experts to come in. I can't get up there and testify because I'm biased. I'm working totally for the defense. So you bring in somebody that doesn't know anything about the case. You let them, go through, walk through, do another walkthrough with the officer, right, and get that cognitive responses. So that's long story, but that's how it came about. I just knew there's got to be a way that we can get that information, because the attorney wasn't there. I mean, the attorney came out to the scene, of course, made sure everything was okay, but that officer didn't know. And I've run into a lot of them. They just don't know what to tell their attorney, what's important in a case, according to Graham Connor, because that's what we're given.
Right.
What did you perceive?
And a few things, with that illustration, is it really highlights, it highlights the need for what we're getting into that you created, because just think of everything he went through, what his family went through, the emotional toll of that, the probably physical toll of that, just, and financial toll, et cetera. But then also the chaos around officer-involved shootings and everything that's going on in the moment. It's easy for these things to be missed. And depending on agency policy and so forth, like that conversation between the two on body-worn cameras, of course, what you would try to avoid. It's usually, hey, go sit there, someone sit with them, and by the way, don't talk. But it's not always so clean, depending on what actually occurred in the moment.
Well, even the questions that can be asked that attorneys don't mind for their clients to answer, safety and security questions. Hey, he threw the gun over in the pond, or, there's another guy over behind those bushes that I had to fight, and he's over there. We need to get him help.
Right.
But an attorney wants to know, and that's why we document this too. They want to know what you did answer and what questions were asked. Yeah. So that's the way, we've got to document that also. They don't want any surprises, attorneys don't.
No, they do not. So you see this problem, and like any good businessman, when you see a problem, you create a solution. So tell us a little bit about the solution you created and what that is coming to be.
Yeah, I just, again, thought there's got to be some way to document all this. I thought, hey, what about a 3x5 card, laminated card an officer can carry? That's not today's world. And a younger person told me, well, Doug, why don't you do an app? I said, yeah, that sounds, so that's what I started working on for 2 or 3 years. Just started writing out the program, not code, but writing how the questions are to be formed, what are the responses. So just created it's basically a framework. It's a checklist. It's not, we're not being suggestive. We're not being leading. It's a way for an officer to document how they looked, and talk about even non-visible injuries, which became important in the Zach Presley case, because he started having migraines because of his head hitting on the asphalt, and he wasn't seen by EMTs. And so we want officers to be seen, whether you're hurt or not. Let's get your blood pressure, let's get your vital signs and explain it. Yeah, my right shoulder is hurting a little bit because what happened, and again, is based on this case. Zach gets on the stand and starts explaining this, and the district attorney, the assistant district attorney, even admonished him, said, well, you know what? You've had 2 years to try to make this story fit what you want it to fit. Oh, it just burned me up.
I'm sure, as it should.
But had we documented that, had he documented that immediately, going to be seen by an EMT, document those things, now it's not a self-serving statement. Now it has been documented. So we eliminate that, the self-serving part that or the what it may look like to a jury. Oh, you're making this up at this time, just like the ADA expressed to the jury.
So a lot of it is just really documenting everything in the moment. It's my understanding that it has both audio and video capabilities as well. It's got some other functionality in there to help them document, but it also isn't input heavy either. Is that correct? Where they're not having to, in a moment where all this has happened, to do kind of a, like you're not typing a report paper.
No, it's not. And it really is. It's check boxes, drop downs. It's audio, no video, but pictures. And this is not we're not talking about pictures at the scene. This is not an evidence collection app. And in fact, we're suggesting that this be used, only with your attorney, or, go home and use it on the laptop. Don't use it on your personal cell phone if you're worried about, your phone being seized, which inputted data within the app is not on the phone itself. It immediately goes to an encrypted cloud. So even if it is seized, they see the Thin Blue Defend files, but they don't see the data that's been inputted. Okay.
So I was going to ask about that, because I heard you mention in a previous interview that it goes to the cloud. Has there been any issues yet with like Discovery where they're trying to grab the personal phone? Because I know that's probably one of the top fears that some people are going to articulate. Has there been anything yet with case law or any legal issues with them trying to seize the phone based on this data have been entered into it?
No, not yet. We only launched in July of last year. So we're just now out there brand new. But yeah, and instead of trying to type in, and you can type in stuff, but I know me, I'm not that savvy with texting and typing. So it's an audio button. So if you want to explain you're prompted, tell us about any injuries. And so you can hit the button and say, my right shoulder is hurting or my left knee or whatever, and explaining that. So now when this goes to your attorney can hear and see anything that you document and take a picture of yourself, later on, or again, not anything at the scene. We don't want an officer doing anything at the scene in the way of documentation. Get away from there, which hopefully you're going to be. But there's a couple of types of investigations. There's going to be the one where you shoot somebody, or gravely injure somebody.
Yep. And
there's going to be an investigation. You're going to be separated. But then this, I've developed it mainly for that. But then I realized if you just wrestle somebody to the ground, you better document it.
Right.
And so, go home, document this. And it's going to, what we've seen is we anticipate also that it's going to give a better report to the agency when you do your use of force report. So now the agency has a benefit of it, of being able to have a better report from this, because those statements are going to carry, they're going to stay with you.
Yep.
Your first statement, either criminal or civilly. Now, of course, a compelled statement can't be used against you, in any kind of criminal trial, but those statements possibly can come up in civil litigation. So there again, if you have a better report from the start, you're much better off 2-3 years down the road.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. And it really, when I first was introduced to it and I'd spent some time thinking about it, where I really saw a parallel, and this is just anecdotal to my own situation, but where I saw the parallel is you think about how important these use of force incidents are when it comes to documenting, like you said, every little component of that moment and what your perspective was in that moment. And sadly, a lot of agencies are wholly inadequate there. But because like DUIs are so heavily litigated, like we actually have a multi-form DUI packet that's very similar to what you're describing for that purpose, because they realized you need to know all these little things. Was it ringing? Were they standing on, all the little nuances of that particular incident, because this thing is definitely going to be litigated, because almost every DUI they try to get thrown out, or, it goes down to reckless or whatever. So how much more important are these use of force situations, and to have something like this that documents every little piece of what the officer knew and experienced in that moment. It's really sad it hasn't existed before this.
Well, again, because of the cases, I always think if it happened to me, when I get on the stand, I want to be able to explain everything. I don't want any information left out, because once, you're convicted, it's hard for an appeal, because you're either looking at, error by the court system or new evidence coming up. So I want all of it out there at that time.
Yes.
So that we can have the jury, if I go before a jury, or, just for the judge, I want those people to know everything that was happening and what I was going through.
Yeah.
What I was perceiving.
In these incidents, there may be, obviously they're the type of incidents that are going to lead to potentially litigation. However, that being said, we all know the better written your report, those are the case, especially from the investigative world, the more solid that report is, the easier the deposition, the greater chances of a plea deal, all those things come into play. Maybe not so much in a use of force type incident, but the principle's the same. The better written that report, the more detailed, the better the defense is going to look at it and be like, there's really not a lot I can do here. Maybe in the depo try to discredit you, but that's going to be about the end of it.
Right. And there is a difference between, shooting somebody like this officer did, 8 times in 2.5 seconds, or tasing somebody 4 times. Shooting somebody 8 rounds in 2.5, that's one justification. You're shooting until the threat of stop. Tasers or CWs, each pull of that trigger is its own separate justification.
Yes,
and that's what I'm trying to get officers to understand. Yeah, I tased him 3 times, but what changed from the first to the second to the third. And you better document each one of those in detail because it changed. I mean, you tase somebody that went down, now they started getting up, well, I had to tase them again. Wasn't complying with my commands. So you better explain all of that.
And I think this is I think taser is especially a great use for what you're talking about here, conducted energy weapons, or electrical weapons. I really do think it is huge because taser does a really good job with collecting a ton of data, but that data isn't necessarily in the officer's favor because it doesn't explain the why. What you're creating here helps provide the why you did what you did, not necessarily what happened. Because I believe it even gets like heart rate. And taser's pretty phenomenal with what the thing actually records now. Plus now, a lot of times they'll actually work with the body-worn camera where if the taser's deployed, the camera pops on. So there's some features there that it has. But I definitely see the need for this.
And that's great, but you know what, Wayne? If you're terminated that night, you have no access to any of that.
Exactly.
You're not allowed back in the department. You don't have access to the computer anymore, to any of those videos. It's all taken from you. So now where are you? Now it's up to you to be able to tell your attorney exactly what happened from your perspective.
Yep. And prayerfully, these kind of things help to eliminate us terminating good officers for good uses of force. That would be a great thing if we would stop doing that in this country.
The last couple of cases I worked in South Georgia a couple of months ago, they had the body cam, and because you mentioned body cam, and the investigative agency called me up and said, Doug, I've got the body cam, but I need for your, get with y'all's attorneys, that are working on this. And I tell you, I work with some great attorneys, and I'm not an attorney, I'm just the investigator. But if your client will just come in and tell me and explain to me what happened in the video, I think everything's going to be okay. And that was the result. The investigative agency said, I'm not charging, now I've got to send it to the district attorney. But at least it from that point, and we went through with these officers with the app, and they were able to explain very detailed what was happening, what the thought process was, what the prior knowledge of this area was, because it was a rougher area than what they are in other areas, explaining all that. And then the agency said, well, we're okay right now, but we'll send it to the district attorney.
Yeah, I think it's a great need, and I really love what you've created. Who is your primary focus customer then? Just to be clear for the listener, is your customer the end user, the specific officers? Is it the agency? Is it both? And I know you kind of touched on it a little bit, but the goal is that it's not on agency cell phones.
Right.
I'll let you take it from there.
Well, we're looking at both. We're looking at an agency because agencies buy certain things for their officers. They buy some of these legal services, whether it be PBA, FOP, and my thing is get those first. You need that legal representation first.
Yeah.
We're not taking the place of that at all, and I don't know if my investors would like to hear that. Say get something before you get us, but that's really what the officers need first is that. But we're looking at agencies to buy it for all of their officers, deputies, and then the individuals. Let's say an agency can't purchase it, then the individuals can sign up for it also. But as law enforcement, we develop for security personnel, and we're looking at other verticals also.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I'll get to that question here in a minute. Let me first ask, what has been your feedback that you've got so far?
It's a learning process. This is brand new, so it's it's. They go, now, what is this again? I mean, we've been to conferences, IACP out in Dallas and South Carolina and Georgia, and they stop and the eyebrows are raised. Well, tell me what this is again. And then after about 5 minutes, they're amazed. We had a professor that wrote his thesis on Graham Connor. When I talked to this professor and explained it to him, he goes, you've done what I've been trying to get officers to do for years. Is to be able to explain what you're given in Graham Connor.
Yeah.
And so, the response is wonderful as far as it now, where do we get the money? It's a budgetary process. We got to wait till, first of the year or middle of the year, whatever the budget cycle is. And, how are we going to come up with the money? But it's just like I knew when I bought into, PBA, legal representation. I never used it, but it was the peace of mind that I had. Had I been involved in something, I knew I had good legal representation.
Yes. In fact, that's literally what I wrote on one of my next points I was going to make is this app really is a peace of mind app. That is the best way to put it, because it really, from the fears that the officers have, their families have, and so forth, this really is all about helping you through what, can be a very traumatic, it really is for the officer, a very traumatic moment in their life. And it doesn't have to be. And this kind of helps provide some of that peace of mind.
Yes, and again, I would, if I was still, and I still carry, so I realized I could be at a restaurant and have to use force, but for the officer, again, as opposed to shooting somebody, as opposed to just maybe pitting somebody, have to drag them out of the car, that doesn't require you to call your legal representation, possibly, but you better document, and that's what hopefully people will look at this and say, this is a good way for me personally to document in my defense that, I'm not going to be investigated, something that minor, but yet, 2 years, they have time to sue you.
Yep.
And they'll wait till, the very last, at midnight on the last of the 2 years to file that suit.
Yeah. And sadly, we've seen it over and over again. What is next for Thin Blue Defend? I know you hit on it a little bit, but it sounds like you might be looking at some other markets, maybe security, the private sector, some of those things over time. Is that next on the agenda, or what else do you have?
It is, and we're going to modify for certain jobs within law enforcement. Corrections. That's a different set of equipment because you're able to upload all your equipment in there. And actually, after the incident, you can pick which piece of equipment you used and explain the justification for that. I've got it in there to where whatever equipment you had on, and let's say you had to chase somebody, when you pre-load all your stuff in, you put in the weight of each piece of equipment. So now at the end of the incident, I can click on, I had on my belt, my gun, and that extrapolates out to, 8.2 pounds. And that's important in a trial because now I can tell the jury, I had on 8.2 pounds running a half a mile chasing this guy, and he had on tennis shoes and shorts.
Right. That's huge.
And you can bring in experts to show I only had so much energy because of the extra weight. He has a lot more energy, or he or she has a lot more energy than me. And that's why when I was so winded, but I had to fight for my life while I was more winded than the person was on top of me.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think that's great. And I love what you're working on and what's coming next, because I think these are all important. And you mentioned corrections. My brother actually is a sergeant in corrections in Louisville. And it's huge. And those poor guys, they're always in uses of force. It's just, it's a different environment, and it's much more common in there, it seems like. Maybe not, obviously, officer-involved shootings. Hopefully. Things have gone really bad if that's happening in a jail. But there's a lot of other uses of force that they're involved in all the time.
Yeah, I'm involved with several use of force experts, and that's what they're finding now, that the rate and the increase in use of force within the prison system is going up.
Yeah.
And again, just you better document you having to put somebody in a chair and put a spit shield over them, and because you're probably going to get sued, because that's what they do in the prison system. Yep. They have their own jailhouse lawyers to help them out with that.
Exactly. And nothing but time to work on the case. So
exactly.
Well, this has been great, Doug. I really appreciate your time on this. I got a final question for you, taking it a little bit different direction. It's my question that I ask everybody who comes on the show. What is the one takeaway, the one thing that law enforcement officers can do that's going to make a difference in their personal lives?
And that's an interesting question, because what I've learned in this, with this use of force app and still investigating and talking to these officers, is their mental health and what they're having to go through. And because I've seen these officers, and I think I saw something to where it was like, I think it was 67% of the problems officers have, with having to deal with stuff, psychological, mentally, is not from the incident itself. It's from everything that goes along with it. the litigation, the waiting, having to deal with a family, your sons, your daughters, your wife, your, whomever, your parents, and having to deal with all that, because you're a police officer. I had one, a trooper. He was a trooper one day, and he was terminated and charged with murder, within a week. I mean, I don't see how an officer deals with that now. So, yeah, what you do and people like yourselves that try to help these officers, I mean, that's tremendous. I mean, they need that just as much as anything else, because I've seen these officers now. Just recently, officers get in trouble, start drinking, you get caught DUI, you get caught with other petty crimes, and it's all a result of these incidents.
Yeah.
And so you got to have something just as important to document this, but something to take care of yourself, somebody you can call. God, please have that, waiting also, to get in touch with somebody, because it's devastating. And I'm seeing that now firsthand on the private side.
Yeah. No, you are absolutely right. And obviously this show and shows like it and some of the great people we were talking about offline, I mean, it really is such an important need. And sadly, officers go out there and think they do the best they can. And then if something gets looked at differently, like you said, they're let go before the end of the day. And what really suffers is that individual. And it's even more sad when in the end, maybe they didn't do anything wrong either, which eventually they're vindicated, but how long does that take?
But it's that waiting. I mean, it's just like I tell everybody. My boss called me on the radio one day on Friday at like 4:00. He says, "You need to be in my office on Monday morning." I said, "No, I'm coming right now."
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm not going to wait the whole weekend and be worried. What do you want to talk to me about? We're going to handle it right now. So no, all this, being charged and having to wait. I mean, it does, and it really affects the minds of these officers, and got to make sure that there's help immediate, because these officers now, I've had one to where, yes, I'm cut off from the department. So now I don't have the department counselor. And plus I don't want to talk to the department counselor anyway, because I'm afraid of, what I may tell them. That heck, I don't know if they're going to go tell the chief or the sheriff.
Yep.
So yeah, having, you better have, this better be in your go bag also, having somebody that you can call immediately.
Absolutely. And we're seeing the same thing in the mental health space, where we're giving them resources that are outside the department because of the stigma associated with it.
Right.
I'm not saying any agencies are doing anything wrong. Hopefully none of them are, but officers feel like that may be happening. And because of that perception, unfortunately that becomes the reality. So, Doug, thank you so much for coming on. For all the listeners, I want to make sure they go to thinbluedefend.com, thinbluedefend.com. I'll have that linked up in the show notes as well. Plus, I'm going to kind of go through that a little bit if you're watching this on video on YouTube or Rumble, so that you can see it firsthand. And I really want all the listeners to check it out. Doug, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for what you do and having me on to get the word out, because it is a learning process, because we are brand new.
Well, you are absolutely welcome, and I look forward to working more together in the future.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.